Hey, welcome to the Plant Yourself podcast. I'm your host, Howard Jacobson. Before we get to today's show, a quick reminder that this podcast is free for everyone and supported by those who can afford it. So if you have found this podcast a useful companion during 2020 and you'd like to see it continue through 2021, I would invite you to go to plantyourself.com/gift if you are in a position where you have the means to support something that means something to you and hopefully you think is doing good in the world. You can use PayPal or Patreon. You can make a one-time contribution or become an ongoing, sustaining patron of the show. And if funds are too tight for you to show your appreciation in a monetary sense, you can still leave a review of the Plant Yourself podcast on whatever platform you listen to podcasts. That also helps us a great deal. All right, on to today's episode. This is the Plant Yourself podcast. I'm Howard Jacobson of PlantYourself.com, the Big Change Program, and WellStart Health. This podcast is part of my mission to help you live a clear and courageous life. Today's guest is Dr. Ayesha Sherzai, who is half of Team Sherzai, along with her husband Dean, who is also an MD, and they're the co-directors of Brain Health and Alzheimer's Prevention at Loma Linda University Medical Center. They're also the authors of a fabulous book, The Alzheimer's Solution, a breakthrough program to prevent and reverse the symptoms of cognitive decline at every age. And unlike a lot of authors and researchers on brain health who are still in love with fatty fish and fish oil and strange supplements, the Sherzais are completely evidence-based, and therefore they are completely plant-based in their recommendations about what we should eat in order to be healthy. However, nutrition is only one of 5 things that they talk about. They have an acronym NEURO, and the N stands for nutrition, and the others, E, U, R, and O, represent other things like exercise, etc. And so this is a very holistic look at how we can stay cognitively fit for our entire lives. Now, I love the way they write. I loved hearing them first on the Rich Roll podcast. If you haven't heard that episode, that might be a good introduction. And I'll include a link in the show notes for this episode, which is plantyourself.com/279. One of the reasons that I love their work is that cognitive decline, dementia, Alzheimer's actually turn out to be more motivating for people to change their lifestyles than things like diabetes, stroke, heart disease, cancer. There's some research that shows that people fear dementia more than they fear death. The idea that their self would disappear while their body lingers, that they would be a burden on others, that they would engage in potentially embarrassing and harmful behaviors and activities. All this really can motivate people to pay attention to changing their lifestyles for the better. And the Sherzais are not only experts in brain health, they're also experts in behavior change. And in our conversation, I got a couple of tidbits from Ayesha that I'm finding incredibly helpful in my own work with clients. Before we get to the interview, just one brief item of business, which is WellStart Health/Big Change Program is offering a new cohort starting in the beginning of August, starting on August 6th, actually. If you already know about WellStart and Big Change Program and you just want to get signed up, you can do that right now. You can go to wellstarthealth.com/apply, where you can take 5 minutes or so to fill out an application, and then we'll get back to you and let you know whether we think you're going to be a good fit for the program. Or if you'd like to learn more, Josh Lajani and I are holding a webinar a week from today, so that would be July 24th. It'll be 6:30 p.m. Eastern Time, 5:30 Central, and it will be recorded. And the topic is the 3 high hurdles to weight loss and health. Now that we've coached literally hundreds of people, some of them for up to 2 years now, we have a real sense of what stops people on their journey to changing their lifestyles and getting healthy. What stops people from adopting healthy diets? What stops people from building and maintaining and growing their exercise regimens? What stops people from developing the mindsets that will see them through when life gets stressful? We've identified the three biggest ones, the ones that in our estimation stop about 97% of people who don't learn how to address them. And the webinar is really an introduction to our Big Change WellStart Health methodology. It's also a lot of useful information. This is not going to be a sales pitch. This is simply a way for us to share some of what we know so that you can decide if we're credible, so you can decide if our personalities and our approach would be a good fit. If you're interested in this webinar, please sign up right away, because by tomorrow we're going to be advertising this on Facebook, which we haven't done before. And I'm guessing, given the amount of traffic that comes to plant-based and health and weight loss sites, that we will get a lot of takers. So consider this my way of lifting up the red velvet rope for Plant Yourself listeners to make sure that you can get in on this if you want to. How do you get it? You go to plantyourself.com/now. So that's just all lowercase NOW, plantyourself.com/now, and that will take you over to the page on WellStart. There's a video at the top, 4-minute video, and then there's a bunch of text. And at the bottom of that page is a place where you sign up. You can just put in name, email, click submit. You know how to do that by now. And that will reserve your seat for the webinar. All right, so that's the end of the business I got. So let's get down to the business of brain health. So without further ado, Ayesha Sherzai, welcome to the Plant Yourself podcast.
Thank you so much for having me, Howard. I'm really excited to be here.
I'm so looking forward to talking to you. I listened to you and your husband, Dean, on the Rich Roll podcast. Gosh, it must have been 6 or 7 months ago at this point. And I remember thinking as I was listening, boy, I would love to talk to them. And it was a 2-hour interview. And I kept thinking, boy, what am I going to talk to them about that they haven't already discussed? And we just got on the Skype, and he said, Dean is called away in an emergency. So I'm hoping that we can have a conversation that goes into specifically the amazing work you're doing on getting people to actually change their habits and behaviors. But first, I guess let's start with the book and your work. Can you first just sort of introduce yourself and Dean by proxy, and
Sure.
let us know what you work on?
Sure. No, thank you for having me, and thank you for everything you're doing. It's incredible, and I'm so glad that we're connected. So I'm a neurologist by training. I trained in preventive medicine and neurology. I did my residency in prevention because of my passion for understanding how to prevent diseases of the brain and neurology at Loma Linda University, and I did a 2-year fellowship at Columbia University in New York, where I did my research on specifically nutrition and brain health and stroke and Alzheimer's disease prevention. And currently, I'm the co-director of the Brain Health and Alzheimer's Prevention Program at Loma Linda University. And along with my husband, Dean, we implement a lifestyle intervention program for individuals who are concerned about their brain health and who have the beginnings of memory decline. And we work with them through implementing lifestyle changes. Dean is also a neurologist, and he has a prevention background and a healthcare leadership. So I think with his skills of, from healthcare leadership and management and behavioral neurology, and my skills in particular aspects of neuro, which is nutrition and lifestyle, we've been able to create this lifestyle intervention program. And I also actually, during my fellowship at Columbia, I went to cooking school and I learned how to cook. So I have a degree in culinary arts just because it was so important for me to know how to make a healthy meal, a plant-based healthy meal for my patients. Because at the end of the day, it was so sad to see that all I could do was just push aspirin and cholesterol pills. I think it's bigger than that. It's all about prevention.
Yeah, now you've used the word prevention, like as you were describing your education and your training and your work, like 8 or 9 times, and I hadn't heard of preventive neurology. Like, where did that come from? Because it's not something that I hear bandied about a lot.
Well, many ways we created it. There is no particular field as preventive neurology, but we created it, and that's based on decades of work and seeing the devastation that brain diseases cause. Let's take one of them as an example, Alzheimer's disease. We are now completely overwhelmed by this disease. It's a tsunami. There are more than 4.3 million people in the United States suffering from this devastating disease, and it's projected to increase significantly in the coming years. And after decades of research and focusing on false models and billions of dollars spent, there is no cure for it. But we now know, and we've known for a very long time from wonderful population studies, that the disease or the pathology actually manifests decades earlier. So we start having the problems about 10 to 20 years earlier before it physically manifests. And if you live a healthy lifestyle, you actually prevent it completely. And we've said this in our book, The Alzheimer's Solution. Our publisher, they said, give us something really catchy to put on the cover of the book. And we said, well, based on our research and based on everything that we've read, Alzheimer's disease can be prevented in 90% of individuals within their lifestyle. And they, boom, just picked that line up and put it on the cover of the book. And it's true, because there, when you look at certain populations, like, say, for example, the Adventists or people living in the blue zones, they never develop, or they, seldom develop cognitive diseases. They live a very vibrant, cognitively vibrant life until very late years, and memory loss is never a concern. And when you look at their lifestyle pattern, it's the way they eat, they move on a regular basis, they are, not under a lot of stress, they manage their stress well. So all of these things matter. And so it's all about prevention, and that's what we're focusing on.
So I want to come back to something you just said about the symptoms, the pathology manifests years before it physically manifests. So is what's happening that the research paradigm is stuck in a materialistic way of looking at it? Like, the way I think of, like, the heart and the cardiovascular system is sort of like, a pump with tubes. Like, my HVAC system. So if the air conditioning isn't going off in one of the rooms, I assume there's an obstruction, or like you could look and see, as opposed to, like, if my computer isn't malfunctioning, I would have no way of, like, looking at, like, prying off the cover, looking at the circuit boards and going, oh, there's the problem. Is that metaphor at all useful in helping understand, like, why brain health might be different in terms of seeing problems versus other body systems?
In many ways, yes. And that has to do with this incredible resilience of the brain. The brain is only about 3 pounds, and it's about 2% of our body weight. But at any moment, it consumes 25% of the body's energy. So it's constantly working really hard, and it's quite resilient. But at the same time, it's one of the most susceptible organs of the body as well. It's resilient because we can actually change the very structure of the brain. We can make connections by living a healthy lifestyle. I think one of the things that we get wrong as individuals is we feel that the brain is completely separate from the rest of the body and it functions in a completely separate way. It doesn't. It has the same vessels, it has the same lymphatics like the heart or any other organ of the body, but because of the constant assault on our brain, whether it's nutrition, whether it's lack of sleep and stress, it's always, trying to get rid of all that junk and the toxic byproducts that it's been exposed to. But then after a while, it starts giving up. For other diseases or for other symptoms, let's say, for example, heart disease or blood pressure, we have medication that controls the symptoms, but the brain functions in a completely different way. And once you start seeing these pathologies, and the way we've described it, pathologies that are as a result of oxidation or dysregulation in metabolism of glucose or fats and inflammation, it starts giving up. And it doesn't really manifest as pain or any alarming symptoms. It can be as subtle as just not feeling well, not being energetic, having mental fog, or having some memory problems, not really relying on your memory for your daily activities, and starting to rely more on a calendar, things like that. So those are the subtle manifestations of cognitive decline. And they've done autopsy studies in people with a large amount of vascular diseases, people who have diabetes, heart disease, and cholesterol. And when you look at their brain, those same pathological processes have actually started long time ago. So the way our work is changing perspective in patients is we say, you just assume that your brain is under a lot of stress and start taking care of yourself before any of these pathological processes take over and they manifest themselves. So live a very healthy lifestyle, even though you're not having any symptoms. One of the very common questions that I get in the clinic is, but isn't this a genetic disease? If I have the genes, I'm going to develop it, and there's really nothing that I can do about it. And we say, well, all of us have, different genes. All diseases are genetic, but Alzheimer's, only about 3% of Alzheimer's disease is purely genetic. And there are specific genes, presenilin 1, presenilin 2, and APP. If you have those genes, you're going to develop Alzheimer's disease no matter what, within a range of years. But lifestyle even affects that. Say, for example, if you have those genes, you probably may develop the disease in your early 60s. But if you live a very, very healthy life, you can actually push it by 10 years. You'll probably develop it in your 70s. But for the rest of the 95% of population who develop Alzheimer's disease, there's no one particular gene. When you look at the gene patterns, there are genes for fighting against inflammation. There are genes that are fighting against immune responses. There are genes that are responsible for removing toxic byproducts in the brain. So if we live a healthy lifestyle and never put our brain through all that stress, those genes are not going to get activated, and we're never going to develop those pathological processes, or Alzheimer's disease for that matter.
So as I was reading in the book, I was getting a little bit lost with all the genetic stuff, trying to keep track of it. But it's not my field. But I always wonder when I hear about genes that, that can cause problems, is there a flip side to those genes, so the presenilins and the APOE4, that under normal circumstances that they would have some advantage in the way that, like, there's like cystic fibrosis genes that are also anti-malarial. Like, what I'm asking? Are there potential benefits to those genetic variations that we see as particularly problematic for dementia and Alzheimer's?
Yes. So it depends on what kind of ApoE genotype you have. The ApoE genotype is a little tricky. So the type of ApoE gene that puts you at a higher proclivity for developing Alzheimer's disease is ApoE4. But then there are other copies. So there are three types of ApoE gene. There's ApoE2, ApoE3, and ApoE4. Each one of us have two copies of these genes, and the combination determines our ApoE genotype. So, for example, you could have ApoE2-2 or 2-3 or 2-4, and the combination determines your risk. ApoE2 is protective. So if you have two copies of that, you're well protected. But ApoE4 puts you at a higher risk. And you know what's interesting? The ApoE4 is actually responsible for transportation of fat across different tissues and cells. So one of the major functions of ApoE4 is to transfer fat and lipids. And compared to ApoE2, it does a rather poor job of it. And that's why there's this huge literature, supportive evidence that cholesterol metabolism dysregulation in the brain can actually induce the beginnings of Alzheimer's disease.
Uh-huh. So, but is there some sort of compensatory benefit if you had an ApoE4 and you were eating a normal human diet that was, low in saturated fat and, sort of a whole food plant-based diet?
Right.
Would there, like, the fact that that something's a little bit lazy, could that mean you have more energy for something else? Like I was trying to figure out, like, is it just bad luck that we have certain genes, or is it just sort of bad luck that we had these genes in combination with an environment?
Well, there's really not much we can do about our genes, but you know what is interesting that even in people who have the ApoE4, say two copies of the ApoE4 alleles, 50% of them don't ever develop Alzheimer's disease. And that's because so why is it that even when we have the high genetic risk, we don't clinically manifest the disease? And it's because of lifestyle. Lifestyle trumps genes, and those who don't develop dementia despite their genetic risk actually have better lifestyle and less health outcomes like diabetes. They don't have high blood pressure and they don't have high cholesterol. That's why it's so important to manage these lifestyle risk factors.
Right. So I think my favorite line in the whole book was that lifestyle is an off-label treatment for cognitive decline.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Right. Because I love that so much, because when I think of off-label, I think of like greedy drug companies who are trying to push sales without having to go through more, FDA approved clinical trials. But like the irony of that you're kind of saying that the same stuff that works on everything else also works for brain health, and actually can be much more profound when it comes to the brain.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Usually off-label is used for, certain, slightly supportive aspects of lifestyle for other diseases. But let me tell you about how important that is for Alzheimer's disease. For the past 2 to 3 decades, billions of dollars spent, Pfizer, you name all the pharmaceutical companies that have done research. And you know what the success rate has been as far as coming up with cure for Alzheimer's disease? 0. We don't have a single medication. As a matter of fact, a couple of months ago, Pfizer withdrew their entire Alzheimer's disease research branch. They said, we quit, we don't want to work at it. And you know that the model is wrong if, a company like that withdraws their research from the field of Alzheimer's disease, period. And they said that they actually don't know whether they're going to start doing research on clinical trials of, creating treatments for Alzheimer's disease. But when you look at lifestyle, just by combination of all the lifestyle risk factors, we had the finger study, or the Finnish geriatric study. It was published in Lancet earlier in 2014. A combination of nutrition and exercise and stress management and cognitive activity reduced the risk of Alzheimer's disease, who were at very, very high risk for it. We have studies from the Adventist Health Study back in the 1990s. Dr. Paul Guillaume, he saw that people who actually ate less meat, who are vegetarians in the Adventist population, they had 50% reduced risk of developing Alzheimer's disease. So half the risk. And then you have studies from Rush University where the MIND diet, just diet only. MIND diet is the hybrid of Mediterranean and DASH diet, which is low in salt, which is, essentially a plenty. I'll tell you about Mediterranean diet later. By, adhering to a MIND diet, people reduce their risk of developing Alzheimer's disease by 53%. And all the other lifestyle risk factors, exercise and stress and everything, was adjusted for it. And, the good thing about that study was that even people who moderately adhered to that diet had 35% reduced risk of developing Alzheimer's disease. Mm-hmm. I did a research at California Teacher Study. 144,000 women followed for, almost 2 decades. And we measured adherence to Mediterranean diet. And I was intrigued to find out what Mediterranean is, because a lot of people say Mediterranean and they think of wine and cheese and pasta, and it's not like that. And when you do factor analysis and statistical modeling to find out what foods stand out, it's actually the vegetables. It's the plant-based components that stand out. It's the greens, beans, berries, plant foods, and not the olive oil, not the fish, and definitely not the poultry. And what we saw was incredible. We saw that higher adherence reduced risk of stroke and vascular dementia, but for every increase in the score, in the adherence score of the Mediterranean diet, the stroke risk and Alzheimer's disease risk reduced as well. So it was not an all or none phenomenon. It was every incremental step towards a better diet actually made a difference. And that, I think, is quite empowering for people. So there's so much more data.
Yeah. So when I hear that, I think, okay, well, we have those same studies for heart disease, those same numbers that you quoted for diabetes, and yet because we have meds that can deal with the symptoms, nobody's interested in talking about, lifestyle medicine for these chronic diseases. But because we have, like, it's almost like there's a blessing in this 0% success rate in dealing with dementia, that all of a sudden these numbers become interesting to people who otherwise wouldn't be interested in them, because there is no, drug money that can be made from successfully treating dementia.
I agree. And I think it's our fault. And by that, I mean, the medical community, doctors. Let me tell you this. I went to medical school. I went to incredible institutions for training, and never, ever did I have a single class or a lecture about the importance of lifestyle in disease prevention. I can't remember. And I've talked to a lot of medical students, and if you look at doctors, 4 years of medical school, 4 or 5 years of residency, and then another, few years for fellowship if they want to super specialize in their field. And you never hear about prevention. We're all trained in a way where we take care of patients when they're sick. So it's essentially a sick care system. I don't know why we call it a healthcare system. And so we go into this field basically trained to give pills, treat, do surgeries, and that's basically it. And I think the conversation and the narrative is changing because we look at the entire spectrum of the disease, starting in the community, at people's homes, in their lives, and then sick care is a very small part of it. And what we're trying to do, Dean and I in the clinic, is we make it our responsibility to reduce the number of medication that people are on by slowly and gradually moving that, using medication as a bridge. Don't get me wrong. I am all for medication if it's needed, but using it as a bridge to push people towards a healthy lifestyle.
Right. And one of the things that I loved about learning about your clinic and your work is that you guys decided at a certain point to become lifestyle medicine professionals. And that, I know a lot of, sort of plant-based doctors who are still pretty, their training, their professional training is in Western, treatments, and they're sort of, lifestyle amateurs. Like they watched Forks Over Knives and changed their, or they read the China study. And I think, ACLM and other organizations are working to bridge that gap. But, you guys really struck me as taking it so seriously that you're like, we have to be as professional at lifestyle as we were in, these decades of training of pills and procedures.
Yeah. We were in the field, just being in the field of neurology and dealing with the diseases that we take care of, Alzheimer's disease and stroke. It's depressing, Howard. After a while, you see that all you're doing is basically passing around nursing home brochures to people and telling them to brace themselves for the trauma and the devastation that is ahead. I was at UCSD, as you may have read in the book, and I was getting my master's in clinical research. This is in between medical school and residency, and Dean was getting his fellowship in dementia. And we were working with world-class scientists, and day in and day out in the clinic, day in and day out in the research facility, I was actually working with a neurologist who was doing functional MRI studies on people who had family history of Alzheimer's disease. So these were younger individuals, and we would bring them in, we would look at their brain and tell them what their risks were for developing Alzheimer's disease, and almost always be ready for it. And in the clinic, same thing. People would come in with their loved ones. You would see the apprehension. You would see the fear. You would see the tears. Incredible human beings, professors coming in with memory loss. And all we would say is like, I'm sorry, you have Alzheimer's disease. This is going to get worse. There's no treatment for it. You may need to get connected with this organization for caregivers. And that's basically it. There are about 2 medications for symptom management that work for 6 months and only about 50% of the population. It was depressing. And so that pain actually made us start looking around. There has to be something else, because we were actually on our path to be trained as clinical researchers to look into the research that has been done over and over again, focusing on one molecule. Look at amyloid molecule, see how you can remove amyloid from the brain, and see if that results in any improvement. But we now know that that's a false model. And by the way, if anybody says that they can reverse Alzheimer's disease, that's absolutely false. Once the brain has reached that point where amyloid, or that protein that has been associated with Alzheimer's disease, has damaged a lot of nerve cells and neurons, there's no coming back. So, and that's when we started reading about the blue zone concept, and we looked at epidemiological studies. We looked at Colin Campbell's work. We looked at Dr. Esselstyn's work, and we looked at Loma Linda, where they have the 7-day Adventist population and the Adventist health study, and there was hope. And we wanted to be in that field, and that's why we were even told by some of our mentors at UCSD, God bless their soul, that if you go into this route of lifestyle, that's career suicide. You will never, ever get a grant from the American Heart Association or the Alzheimer's Association. And it's true, they don't really support something as comprehensive as that. But you know what? That was the best risk we took, because there's so much hope in this field.
Right. So, and, I mean, one of the things that occurred to me as I was reading, when you talk about like brain resilience and this idea of reserve and, these networks that we can create, and, how non-material it is compared to, say, heart and lungs. And I understand that there's all this vascularization in the brain. It is ultimately, a piece of meat, just like everything else. But when I look at like the difference between, penicillin to treat infections and, say, the psychiatric drugs, which as I look at, I see sort of the same thing, this desire to create materiality, to say, oh, well, it must be the serotonin, it must be the dopamine, and we can go in and to see, that pretty much there's no antidepressant that's better than placebo, and to see, the antipsychotic drugs are incredibly addictive and can be harmful. Like the idea that we can go into the brain and with our human hubris figure out exactly how to tweak it, like a mechanic, tuning up an engine. It just seems extremely unlikely that, within the next 100 years or so, we'll have anything approaching that level of sophistication.
Well, I'm a very optimistic person as far as that area is concerned. I think we've made a lot of strides in the field of technology and artificial intelligence, and I think we're getting closer and closer to understand the mechanics of the brain. And yeah, sometimes it seems very, seems very unsophisticated to understand how simple the process can be. But I think the beauty of that is the manifestation of this change that the brain goes through during lifestyle. We always look at the brain as something magical. I started by saying that, but when you look at how it functions, it's just incredible. Neurons or brain cells can make as little as 2 connections with each other to communicate and transfer information, or as many as 20 or 30,000 connections. And these connections are built and broken on a regular basis, even well into our 50s, 60s, 70s, and beyond. And there is this notion that, after a certain point, the brain doesn't grow, but we now know we actually have the tools and the procedures to determine the constant growing nature, the plasticity of the brain. And let me tell you a story. I think you probably may have read it in the book, but the research that was done on the London taxi drivers. The London taxi drivers apparently go through this grueling experience of memorizing the streets in London, and they have to take a test to be licensed as cab drivers. And one of the universities in London, they did a research project to look at the before and after of these cabbies going through these tests. And after the test, for those who passed the test, they actually tested their memory scores, and they looked at their brains. Their hippocampi, which are the areas of the brain that are responsible for memory and coding, had grown significantly and were continuously growing, and their cognitive tests had improved. And compared to those who didn't take the test, who were on constant decline, it was just incredible. So it is growing, it is changing, and we are understanding that concept very well, the concept of brain resilience and cognitive reserve, that this is something that we can work on. And that's why it's important for people to understand that it doesn't take a magical pill to build resilience. It's that brain bank account that you start putting money in your 20s, 30s, 40s, and that seems to help later on in life.
Right. And I think by understanding, I think we're talking about both like appreciating what the brain can do, but also it's like where I'm saying we're not getting anywhere is if we start thinking that we understand a certain neural pathway or a neurotransmitter, and we can create the equivalent of a pill. And, in the book you talk about Sudoku and crossword puzzles and tangrams are fine, but they're not real life brain engagement that involves facial recognition and social cues and logic. And, so in thinking about like how we go about treating the brain, what I'm coming to is that lifestyle is so much more complex and organic than anything that we can artificially create, whether it's a pill or whether it's, hooking someone up to electrodes, and just, sort of feeding them some sort of systematic intervention, as opposed to just sort of messy life itself.
You're absolutely right. No, you're absolutely right. And I think it's the concept of reductionism in every field that has basically propelled that concept. We think of the magic pill or the vitamin concoction or the brain game, but the brain doesn't work like that. Just like you said, it's more complex. We need a very comprehensive, multifaceted approach, and that's why real life activities or real life situations seem to be more beneficial. And when you look at specific areas of the brain, they don't work alone. It works in synergy and in harmony with the rest of the brain, and that's how you should, and that's how we all should approach brain health.
All right. So let's talk briefly about the 5-letter acronym Neuro. So we can kind of lay a foundation for people. I found it incredibly helpful and also humbling as I was reading the book, like, I was doing really, really good until I got to R, then I was like, oh dear, like I got some work to do. So let's go through that, and then maybe we can get into how we can actually help people adopt these behaviors.
Sure. So we came up with this acronym, Neuro, like neurology, N stands for nutrition, E stands for exercise, U stands for unwind or stress management, R is restorative sleep, and O is for optimizing cognitive activities, but in the context of social activities, like we discussed earlier. It's a cute acronym, but essentially it's based on all the evidence that we've had from many, many decades regarding lifestyle and regarding brain specifically. And each one of them may vary for person to person, like yourself. You said you need to work more on the R aspect of it. There are people that need to work more on nutrition and exercise, but it can't be one or the other. It has to be all of them at the same time.
All right. Okay. So let's go through each one. And one of the things when I was listening to you and Dean on the Rich Roll podcast, as I was going through an airport, and I stopped at the airport bookstore, and they had like 2 books on diet and dementia, or diet and Alzheimer's. Neither one was yours. And so I looked at it, and of course, I'm guessing you can predict what they were telling people to eat.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
Right. So, like fish was the big thing, but, make sure you get lots of fats for the brain and protein. And so I'm curious, like, what are they seeing and what are you seeing? That's so different.
There's a lot of clutter and noise out there as far as nutrition is concerned. And I think the concept of confirmation bias is very pervasive. People start with a notion that something, they're comfortable with, and they look for evidence that supports that fact. And nowadays, you put any two terms together on Google, and you will find some sort of a relationship for each one of them. Say, soccer shoes and aluminum, or headaches and I don't know, your blueberry levels. So it's sad to see that, because Dean and I, we work in the trenches, we work with patients, and we see the pain and the devastation that they go through. And for us, it's very personal. It really becomes very personal, because we had two grandparents who suffered from it. We saw how it aged our parents. We saw how the grandchildren were affected by it. Our grandparents were incredible human beings, and they became like children. They lost parts of themselves. And then you see our lovely patients who go through this day in and day out, and the pain that they suffer. And so it kind of makes us, very upset. As far as diet is concerned, you hear a lot about paleo and ketogenic and fish and all that, but the data is very clear. Really, there's no conflict. You look at population studies, you even look at, clinical trials. It's plants that seem to be quite protective. And that's why in our book, we wanted to emphasize that a whole food plant-based diet is the best diet for the brain. The Mediterranean diet studies, when they do them, it's not the olive oil. It's definitely not the fish. It's the greens and the beans and the berries that stand out. There was a time when people were fighting about fats. Saturated fats are not bad. We even had it on the cover of Time magazine that butter is back, bacon is back. Butter was never back. Bacon will never be back. From all the studies that we have encountered, and from our own studies at Loma Linda University, again and again, over and over again, plant-based diet seems to be protective. So why is there so much noise? And why is it that people who are selling some vitamin concoctions are winning? I guess it's because of desperation and because of just the very nature of our society. If you have a lot of Instagram followers, and if you seem to be a journalist with access to social media and to TV, you get a lot of sound bites. And people who do real research, they usually don't. We have fabulous researchers and physicians like Dr. David Katz. He came with his book Disease Proof. And in that book, he talks about how 80% of diseases can be prevented with three things: food, exercise, and smoking or lack thereof. And specifically for food, we have so much data that shows that plants are good. So, about fish and about olive oil and about meat, those are, confirmation biases. But I'm actually happy to say that for the first time, just a couple of weeks ago, three people actually came to a consensus, three very unlikely individuals. And I don't know if you read that, Howard, but there was a consensus paper from Harvard University on saturated fats, or fats in general, and disease. And people like Gary Tobes and Ronald Krauss and Walter Willett from Harvard University, who were not in agreement as far as fat was concerned, they actually agreed that saturated fats that are derived from animals are bad for cardiovascular disease, for brain health, for diabetes, and so on and so forth, for all chronic disease of the aging. And unsaturated fats, which are derived from plants, think nuts and seeds and avocados and maybe small amounts of extra virgin olive oil, are actually beneficial. So there, I think the most beautiful thing about science is its true humility. You got a lot of false humility out there, but the true humility of science is this statement: to the best of our knowledge today. And that's what we can go with. And the evidence shows that a plant-based diet is protective.
Huh. No, I hadn't seen that bit of good news. I guess my Google feed is optimized for negativity. I must have a good news filter that I have to turn off.
No, I'll definitely send you that paper. It was incredible, and that is that takes care of a lot of the noise out there.
Huh. I'm really excited to see that. So you mentioned David Katz and you mentioned Esselstyn. So I just saw I don't know if you saw this, an article, and I think David Katz wrote from LinkedIn. It seemed like sort of obliquely critiquing Esselstyn's take on olive oil. Mm-hmm. And so I don't want to get too far into the weeds, but I think it's an example. And I noticed in your recipes you have, half a teaspoon, a tablespoon of extra virgin olive oil. And also you mentioned earlier that you see a beneficial effect on health from incremental changes.
Yes.
So is like, and just to say what I think what David Katz was saying was that Dr. Esselstyn's categorical statement that all oils are bad may have been based on a reductionist study, and that extra virgin olive oil may be protective, although it's not such a big deal. But I'm wondering, did you decide to include olive oil in the recipes because you think it's protective, or because you think it will help people make incremental changes, and that that without it would be harder for them to enjoy their food?
Right. The latter. We believe in progress. The all or none phenomenon, or the either you do this or you're doomed picture never works in healthcare. And with the kind of population that we work with, who are devastated with vascular diseases like diabetes and heart disease and so on and so forth, the transition is very difficult. We added olive oil to make it easier and to make it more palatable for them. I'm familiar with Dr. Katz's article, the one that you just mentioned, and I think he clearly states that ultimately the most optimal diet is a diet that is high in vegetables, a plant-based diet. Is that diet better with olive oil? No, there is no evidence that addition of olive oil makes an optimal, plant-based diet better. But does it make it worse? It depends. So if somebody actually has, say, for example, high cholesterol, or at some cellular level, some inflammation, the addition of that extra virgin olive oil may actually make the diet less optimal. And that person may benefit from the lack of any kind of poly or monounsaturated or extracted oils. But, like I said, we believe that no oil is better than any oil when you look at the most optimal diet. But again, it's okay to add a little bit of olive oil if you have pristine coronary arteries, and if you have no cholesterol issues, and if you're healthy in all the other aspects of neuro. And that's what we go by. In people who have mild cognitive impairment in our clinic, we actually try to put them on the least amount of extracted plant oils. And definitely not coconut oil and palm oil, because, it's one of the few plant oils that are very, very high in saturated fats, and it's actually detrimental for the brain health.
Gotcha. So before we get back to the euro of neuro, yes. you wrote in the book that the medicine is moving to a place of personalization, and right. and your work is clearly based on that, and we'll get into kind of how you coach people. I love all the stories about, okay, this person needs a recumbent bicycle to watch television, this person needs to start doing this, and yet something like you talk about confirmation bias. I've gotten into lots of arguments with local sort of holistic practitioners who have swallowed the bioindividuality thing, and they use that to say, well, some people need lots of meat and some people should have, and so when I hear personalized medicine, some of my hackles immediately go up, because I think someone's trying to say that, well, there's, every one of us is basically a different species. But I think you're saying something different from that. Can you help me navigate the truth of personalized medicine versus, taking it to an extreme?
I hear you. I see that in our clinic all the time. I think the concept of personalization in our program focuses on habit formation and maintaining a healthy lifestyle. Personalization and bringing the concept of reductionism in each and every field of neuro is baseless, because the only thing that we can go by is data. And if data in a large population shows that certain foods are good for you and others are bad, then we have no other choice but to stick to that. You can't really go by anecdotes. If somebody's uncle had steak and potatoes all his life and smoked 2 packs a day, but lived, well into his 90s and had no cognitive decline, he just got lucky and he had probably some good genes. But we can't use that individual as an example to move forward. And, for people who actually dwell into, the minutia of diet and adding this and that and checking their, whatever it may be, their profile, there really there's no evidence for it. I've heard people say that, personalized diet is the next step. But that's not how it works, because as you may know, the concept of synergy in the field of nutrition is ubiquitous. It's not one element that works alone. It's the combination of all of these things together. And over again, I sound like a broken record. The plant-based diet seems to be protective. Any addition of meat or some other vitamin or mineral may be baseless. Except for deficiency states, I have to say, for vitamins. Like, say, for example, if somebody comes in with vitamin D deficiency or vitamin B12 deficiency, that could affect their health. It's very important to replace that. I think that's the level of personalization for that field. But, we have to make sure that we stay within the perimeter of scientific evidence when we bring in the concept of personalization in diet.
Beautiful. I love that distinction. You're basically talking about personalization of the journey as opposed to the destination.
Right. Agreed.
Gotcha. All right. Can we handle the exercise, unwind, restore, and optimize?
I can go through them real quickly.
Great.
I'm on a time crunch till 10 o'clock, but is it okay if I just
well, you know what? In that case, let's let people read the book, and I would just love to hear from you. Like, what have you learned about how to get people to change? Because on page 6 of the book, you write, you've become masters of midlife behavior change in people who are unenthusiastic about changing anything. And, as I've co-founded a startup where I'm now going out into employer populations and speaking to employees, they haven't come to me. So it seems like we're now talking to the same group of people. And I would love to learn what you have learned about how you get people to begin to want to make these changes and to sustain them once they do. Absolutely.
I think the science of building habits is the cornerstone of our program. What we provide in our program is different in so many ways. Obviously, it's based on science, but it's centered on a well-established behavioral modification program that helps people change their course towards a healthy living in their own time with their own intrinsic motivational processes. And if we don't take habit building in a proactive, intentional manner, we're basically left with the patterns of habit that were laid down during our early years, when our immediate physical needs or our insecurities and fears were the driving force behind any behavior. And so in many ways, we're actually helping people unlearn a lot of things that they had learned during their lives and build very solid habits moving forward. And here's where the concept of personalization comes forth full force. We have to understand where the person is. We have to understand their resources, their limitations, their desires. And one of the most important things that we try to help them create for themselves is a purpose. It's so funny because we were writing this book, Dean and I, and we heavily driven by science and looking at PubMed and all the papers that we had written, but it became more and more of a purpose-driven life kind of a situation where, at the end of the book, we realized that none of this matters if people don't have a vision and a mission and a goal to move towards. And it doesn't necessarily have to be a huge goal like I'm going to help save the oceans or I'm going to help save the orchids. It can be as simple as I just don't want to forget things. I want to wake up and feel phenomenal every single day. And so we want to pull that out of people and understand where their purpose is and work it backwards towards looking at all of the elements that they have and then adding one small thing on a regular basis to help them towards that purpose or a goal. And we understand completely the importance of incremental steps. People actually take on way too much, or they make completely false goals for themselves, and that's why they keep failing. Dean calls it the nuclear minefield. Sometimes we as physicians are the worst when it gives to creating hope for people. At the door, the doctor tells patients, you know what, you need to eat well and you need to exercise, but not giving them those steps or understanding how that works for them makes the person lose hope completely and never reconsider going back to that field at all. So, we look at each and every element in people's life, whether it's nutrition, whether it's stress. We actually find out when these habits were laid. Most of the time it's during our teenage years when, all of these needs were driven by, these habits were driven by our needs. And we break that autopilot situation. Most of our lives is in autopilot mode through our habits. And it's impossible to get rid of habit-driven behaviors because that's just how the brain works. And when you look at the brain, the higher cortical part of the brain requires a lot more energy. But the habits are located in the basal ganglia, which is a low energy state of the brain. And it's very easy for us to repeat habits over and over again. So it's like cutting those behaviors and those pathways in the basal ganglia and recreating new ones and allowing people to take time to recreate this. And I think it's been one of the most satisfying experiences ever, looking at people coming in with bad habits and slowly and gradually building new ones moving forward.
And I imagine it's very empowering for people to hear from brain scientists, this is why you have bad habits. It's not, it's how your brain is wired. It's how your experience is, rather than there's something wrong with you.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And to tell them that, motivation is such a misnomer. I mean, what is motivation? People say, I'm not motivated to move forward. We actually use the SMART goal techniques, and we show them the different stages of habit or behavior change, whether it's contemplation and preparation, maintenance, so on and so forth. And we try to find out where they are. And a lot of people say, I'm not motivated. But motivation is when you have small successes in your path and you associated those successes with an emotion. I like it. I love it. I feel good. That's motivation. So unless we create small successes in any realm, there is no motivation. And it's wonderful to actually see people develop that definition for themselves in our program.
And I know you have to go, but just one thing I was noticing is I've shared your book with a bunch of people, especially a friend of mine who I've been trying to help him get off of sugar for years, maybe a decade. And I know that when he reads your book, he's going to get off of sugar because he cares more about not having dementia than about anything else. And I wonder if you find that, I don't know if you can compare to other motivations or other fields, but it feels like people really, really don't want to get Alzheimer's, even more so than they don't want to get cancer or heart disease or diabetes or other physical afflictions.
It's interesting. You said that they did a survey a few years ago, and they found out that people are scared of Alzheimer's and dementia more than they're scared of death. And I get it. And, we see that. They're one of the most motivated people to work with because at the end of the day, we are our brain. We are our emotions. Our emotions reside in our brain. And, you can replace any other organ from the body. And cardiologists don't like that. They get upset with us when we say so. But, you can replace the heart, you can replace the kidney, you can even replace the liver, but you can never replace the brain. The minute you do that, you replace the person. So it is the most important organ of our body. And once you start taking care of your brain, you've taken care of the rest of the body, because your motivation, your emotions, your memories make up who you are.
This is beautiful. I have another hour's worth of questions for you. I know you got to go.
We'll get together again. I love this. Thank you. You have such a great population, and you do great work, and I appreciate being here. But it's fascinating, isn't it?
Oh, it is. And I'm glad I have you on tape saying that we can do this again. So
Of course.
I'll hold that over you. I look forward to meeting Dean. And Dr. Ayesha Sherzai, thank you so much for the work you do, for your book. Tell us the book again and tell us your websites for people who want to find out more.
It's my pleasure. Our book is called The Alzheimer's Solution, and you can get it from teamsherzai.com. And I have to add something. All the profits of the book go to our non-for-profit organization called the Healthy Minds Initiative that Dean and I created, basically helping disperse information, the right information, science-based information to different communities about brain health, prevention, and living a long, healthy life.
Beautiful. We didn't even touch on the work you've done in San Bernardino and all the social outreach you've done. A lot of that's in the book. Also, a lot of that I recommend everyone listen to you guys on Rich Roll podcast, and I'll include a link to that as well. It just puts a smile on my face to know that there are folks like you out in the world doing this work, and we're locked arm in arm, trying to spread the message of health and potential and purpose. So thank you so much for all you do. And it's Team Sherzai. It's TeamSherzai.com.
It's my pleasure, Howard. Thank you so much for having me.
Be well. So, dear listener, what did you take away from that conversation? I am definitely going to work on my R, on restorative sleep. Of course, I read the book in addition to having this conversation. So if you haven't read the book, I definitely recommend that you get it. It's a great book to give to other people as well. The Alzheimer's Solution by Dean and Ayesha Sherzai. Now, if you enjoyed this episode of the Plant Yourself podcast and you'd like to support our mission, there's a bunch of ways to do that. You can subscribe and leave a review on iTunes. You can become a patron at plantyourself.com. Just click on the right sidebar where it says Patreon, and you can become a monthly contributor to help this thing keep going. You can also spread the word about Well Start Health and the Big Change program. So if you know folks whom you think would benefit, you can send them to wellstarthealth.com. And you can also let them know about the webinar, the 3 High Hurdles to Weight Loss and Health, which they can register for, same as you, at plantyourself.com/now, N-O-W. If you're looking for the show notes to this episode with links to all the stuff we talked about, you can get that at plantyourself.com/279. If you're new to the show, you can catch up on 278 archived episodes over at plantyourself.com. Including a couple that are related to this episode in that they focus on sleep and sleep health, and they are with my buddy Emerson Wickwire. So if you just do a search for the word Emerson at plantyourself.com in the search bar at the top right, you'll find those episodes, and they will be very relevant to all of this stuff about brain health. So the garden is now producing a flurry of both blueberries and elderberries. The blueberries I'm not very good at picking because of my Dutan's color blindness, so my wife and son do the heavy lifting there. My job is to put them in plastic bags for the freezer and make them into food. The elderberries are far less straightforward in that when they're ripe, we just cut off the big umbel, looks the umbrella-like lacy structure that holds all the teeny little berries, stick that in the freezer in a bag, and then when it's frozen, the berries fall off, and then we turn that into tinctures and medicines, which is to say my wife turns it into tinctures and medicines. We also got this very, very cool vining spinach with leaves that are not so tasty raw, but they're lightly steamed. They're very, very delicious. I'm not sure exactly what it's called, what the species and genus is, but it's delicious and it's very prolific, and it's something that the rabbits and groundhogs and deer don't seem to be interested in yet, or at least they haven't found it. So in running news, this past weekend I rolled my ankle pretty badly at an ultimate frisbee practice, so I'm holding my breath, hoping that it heals in time for nationals. I'll probably still go to Chicago, even if I'm not playing or not playing that much. But I hope to be all healed. Got a lot of ice and elevation and rest and compression and all that other stuff. And hopefully my plant-based diet will help me with a speedy and full recovery there. All right, cue the music. Cue Sabali Dawn, The Dance of Peace by Will Ridenauer. You can find more of Will's music at willridenauer.com. It's a perfect intro to this podcast, and I love how it floats underneath my gratitudes when I name all the people who have become patrons, who have helped out, who have been generous and supported this mission. As in Kim Harrison, Lynn McClellan, Anthony Disson, Brittany Porter, Dominic Mara, Barbara Whitney, Tammy Black, Amy Good, Amanda Hathaway, Mary Jane Wheeler, Ellen Kelly, Mr. Cobb, Rachel Bears, Christine Nelson, Gina Sharf, Dean Ahern, Jen Blakanovsky, David Bizek, The Mysterious, Michelle X, Elspeth Feldman, Victoria Dola, Manova, Leah Stroller, Alan Christensen, Colleen Peck, Michelle Andrews, Josina, Julian Rollins, Stu Nola, Sarah Circus, Dirkus Reza Circus, Kelly Cameron, Wayne Pedersen, Leanne Peterson, Janet Selby, Claire Adams, Tom Franzik, Jeanette Benham, Gila, Sarah David Donahue, Blair Cyber, Dorona Vizov, Gio and Carol Argentati, Jody Friesner, Ruth Ann Thunderberg, Misha Rosen, Michael Warbeck, the Equally Mysterious Tracy, Alicia Lemus, Alicia Lemus, Rebecca Hughes, Val Linneman, Rhymes with Cinnamon, Nick Harper, Stephanie Holmes, Martha Bergner, Nicole Ramsey, Susan Ahmad, Molly Levine, The Inscrutable Harry R., Susan Laverty, The Panda Vegan, Craig Kovic, Adam Sharp, Karen Burry, Heather Morgan, Ashley Corcoran, Kelly Machia, Dean Norton, Bonnie Lynch, Plant Happy Oregon, Sabina Kurtzels, Nigel Davies, Marion Blum, Teresa Copel, Shell Rutledge, Julian Watkins, Breed O'Connell, Brian Sheridan, Shannon Hirschman, Kate Rose, Linda Ayat, Julie Langholm, Hedegard, Isa Tuzin, Wakani, Hainline, Aaron Greer, Alicia Davis, Aviva Lael, Heather O'Connor, Carolyn Jensen, Cherry Orlikowski of Plant Powered for Health, Karen Smith, Scott Mirani, Karen and Joe Crabtree, Tanya Lewis, Kirby Burton, Teresa Carell, Kevin McCauley, Elizabeth Rothschild, Kelly Baker Miracle, and Jesse Cheryl Dwyer, Jenny Hazelton, Valerie Peltier, Peter W. Evans, Colleen Harrison, Justine Divitt, Joshua Summermeyer, Dennis Bird, Darby Kelly, and Lori Fanny for your generous support of the podcast. That's it for this week. As always, be well, my friends. All right, time for thanks. Thanks to Will Ridenauer for allowing me to use his beautiful song Sabali Dawn, The Dance of Peace. You can find more of Will's music at his website, willridenauer.com. And of course, thanks to all of you Plant Yourself podcast patrons. Kim Harrison, Lynn McClellan, Anthony Disson, Brittany Porter, Dominic Maurer, Barbara Whitney, Tammy Black, Amy Good, Amanda Hatherley, Mary Jane Wheeler, Ellen Kennelly, Mr. Cobb, Rachel Behrens, Christine Nielsen, Tina Sharf, Tina Ahern, Jennifer Volkanovsky, David Bizek, The Mysterious, Michelle X, Elspeth Feldman, Leah Stoller, Alan Christensen, Colleen Peck, Michelle Landry, Josina, Sarah Dirkus, Rhymes with Circus, Kelly Cameron, Wayne Pedersen, Janet Selby, hi Janet, Claire Adams, Tom Franzak, Jeanette Benham, Gillis, Sarah David Donahue, Blair Cyber, Dorona Vizov, Gio and Carolyn Argentati, Jody Friesner, Ruth Ann Thunderberg, Misha Rosen, Michael Warbeck, The Equally Mysterious Tracy Z, Aviva Lael, Alicia Lemus, Rebecca Hughes, Val Linneman, Rhymes with Cinnamon, Nick Harper, Martha Bergner, Susan Ahmad, Molly Levine, The Inscrutable Harry R., Susan Laverty, The Panda Vegan, Craig Kovic, Adam Sharf, Karen Burry, Heather Morgan, Kelly Machia, Deanne Norton, Bonnie Lynch at Plant Happy Oregon, Sabina Kurtzels, Nigel Davies, Marion Blum, Teresa Coble, Julian Watkins, Breed O'Connell, Shannon Hirschman, Linda Ayat, Holm Hedegard, Isa Tuzin-Wa, Connie Hainline, Aaron Greer, Alicia Davis, Heather O'Connor, Carolyn Jensen, Sherry Orlikowski of Plant Powered for Health, Karen Smith, Scott Mirani, Karen Joe Crabtree, Tanya Lewis, Kirby Burton, Teresa Carell, Kevin McCauley, Elizabeth Rothschild, Ann Jesse, Cheryl Dwyer, Jenny Hazelton, Valerie Peltier, Peter W. Evans, Colleen Harrison, Justin Divitt, Joshua Summermeyer, Dennis Bird, Darby Kelly, Lori Fanny, Linnea Lundquist, Valerie Hummel, Emily Iaconelli, Levy Wallach, Rosamund McAtee, Dan Picorni, Stephen Lehman, Patty DiMartino, Mike and Donna Kartz, Deanne Bishop, Bill Brielf, Gunter Schmidt, Marjorie Lewis, Kelly Molden, Trish Adams, Ian Kramer, Nancy Sheldon, Lindsay Bayshore, Gunmarie Hagan, Tracy Gullich, Laura Heaton, Meg from Mama Says, Rochelle Kennedy, Diana Goldman, Stacey Stokes, Ben Savage, Michael Kay, Holly Butler, David Hughes, Connie Rogers, Claire England, Sally Robertson, Paran Ganshi, Amy Daly, Brian Tourville, Mark Jeffrey Johnson, Josie Dempsey, Karen Schmidt, Pamela Hayden, Emily Perryman, Olga Sidorowska, Allison Corbett, Richard Stone, Lauren Vaught of Edible Musings, Aaron Hasty, Sean Owen, Sagar Nayak, Erica Piedra, Danielle Roberts, Michael Lushton, and Sarah Johnson for your generous support of the podcast. That's it for now. As always, be well, my friends.